In this video, I would like to discuss the composition sign product. The composition sign product is used for such things as interior architecture and ADA signage. If we're inside control within an estimate, in our list of products you'll see composition signs. The one you want to start with is the composition sign product. The piece cannot be opened from here. It can only be opened from within the composition sign product. So if I'm in the composition sign product, first of all, it wants to know how many they're doing, the overall size, height, and width, and then a definition of what it is that we're doing. And this is just really text. I could type in whatever it is that I want. You can set up things in the drop-down list just to make them convenient. And then we're going to build this project in pieces. If we look at the help screen, this is an example of something like a photopolymer sign, interior architecture sign, where you have the front view, side view, and it shows the layers. Well, we can build this structure in layers within the product by adding one layer at a time. So if I add a new piece, because you may have multiple pieces in one layer, but at this point I have my quantity 1, it's defaulting my height and width, what it is that I'm doing, such as the piece, backplate, faceplate, applied text, and again this is more informational, and you can add to this list for convenience. The process that we're doing, whether it's dimensional, which is more like your routing, whether it's an extruded piece, a finished goods inventory, such as something you've already been working on and put back in inventory, a flat stock print, whether it's framing, mounting, outsourced, photopolymer, or roll stock. In this case, let's say it's going to be a photopolymer faceplate, interior photopolymer, and then the type of photopolymer you're using. And how are we utilizing the material? Meaning, if I'm doing one 12 by 12, if I utilize the full sheet, that's basically saying I want to utilize the full sheet because I process the full sheet at one time. So therefore, it's going to always round to the next full sheet. In this case, I've got 3 full sheets to do 5. If I say area only or quarter sheet, it's going to use just the material utilization area, so it's just 5 square feet, and then I can add any scrap value that I'd like as a percentage rather than rounding to the next physical size of the material. Based off that we chose the process of photopolymer, this photopolymer process is a defined other part. It sets the defaults for the rest of the system. So the fact that I chose photopolymer here, you'll notice my photopolymer process at the bottom has defaulted. So now I can just say yes, I'm adding the photopolymer processing. You'll notice the setup was checked by default as soon as I checked the add photopolymer. This is consistent through the products. It means yes, this photopolymer has a setup time to set up the machine, and it is being applied. The reason it's there is if I'm doing multiple pieces and more than one have photopolymer, I may choose not to utilize a setup charge on each piece because I'm still only setting it up once. So you could remove it at this point. Then the process or equipment that you do the photopolymer processing on, the text and image that it's going to say, and if there's a window in that photopolymer. Then in that photopolymer, I may need to hot stamp it or screen print tip it. I can do either. From hot stamping, I'd say add hot stamping, the machine, and then the foil and foil color. And the percentage of fill. Remember, at this point, we're working on a 12-inch by 12-inch. So the letters themselves of the photopolymer that I'm hot stamping only really make up about 30% of the sign. I can do the same thing with screen printing, is where I use a press, manual tipping, to tip the letters, and then I'm adding screen printing and continue on with ink type and dryer if one's required. Finishing. This is really for your miscellaneous finishing, drill holes, rounded corners, adhesions, and just apply finishing and which ones you're using. The braille. Since this is a photopolymer, if I'm adding braille, I will probably say included in the process because I will burn the braille beads at the same time I burn everything else. So there is no additional charges because it's done at that time, or at least by default. If I'm not including it in the process, which means I'm generally going to raster it manually, what is the text? You'll notice when you enter the text, it does give you a sample of what the braille should look like, and then the beads that are being used. And in this case, then it will calculate both a labor time to apply those and how many you're going to be using. Next thing we need to do is cut this out when we're done, because I'm doing more than one 12-inch by 12-inch on 19 by 25, so now I need to go in and cut them out. And how am I going to cut them out? With a hand cut, maybe? It's a fairly simple cut. Now what you've seen, is I've gone through and put in this first layer of photopolymer. I'm cutting it out, I'm hot stamping it, and I'm adding braille. The next thing I want to do is add a backplate. So I'm going to add a new piece again. It's defaulting to my overall size. I could overwrite that if I were to add multiples, such as if I had two spacers that I needed to make out of, I could say I have two 1-inch the process is really just dimensional because I'm just going to cut it out to make. I'm going to make them out of acrylic. I'm going to go to cutting. I'm not engraving this. You'll notice that when I did dimensional, it defaulted to engraving. But I'm not really doing anything other than making spacers. So I'm just going to cut this one out. So in this case, I have 1-inch by 12-inch. I have two of them per piece, which means a total of 10, giving me a total square footage and sheet size, and I'm cutting them out. My next piece will then be the back plate. Here I have a 12-inch by 12-inch back plate. The process, dimensional again, acrylic, let's say the back plate also has a little bit of vinyl at the bottom. So I'm going to route it out and then add a little cut vinyl to it at the bottom. So I can then say I'm going to add a cut vinyl, the type of vinyl I'm adding, and the cutter. Okay. And then any note. I'll say serious on bottom. Okay. Now I have my different pieces, my one A, B, and C. If I look at the summary, it is basically breaking up this particular piece as parent-child relationship. So I have my composition sign, my different pieces, A, B, and C. If I look at the parts tab, it's going to break out the parts individually for each part of that sign. I can also choose the pieces individually or choose the composition sign as a whole. Right, back to my estimate. Okay, let's discuss the processes that we're doing here. At this point, I did the photopolymer dimensional. We also have extrusion, such as for aluminum extruded items that will be applied, finished goods inventory, flat stock print, framing, mounting, outsourcing photopolymer and roll stock. Now these processes can be created yourself and to define what you do. If I am doing photopolymer and I don't have hot stamping but only have screen printing, then I don't want this hot stamping to show up. In that case, what we will do is, if we're in the Adjust Part Information screen, under View Parts by Product, under Composition Sign, and then under Piece, because this is what we're talking about, all the different pieces, we have the composition sign process types. This is listing our different ones we've talked about, such as dimensional, extrusion, flat stock, etc. This is where you set your defaults. So if I scroll to the right, you'll see for dimensional, I'm using flat material by default, or instead of extrusion, finished goods, or roll stock, and these can all be defined by drop-down lists from here. If we're defaulting a specific part, such as the extrusion, we're going to say it defaults to aluminum. Photopolymer, we default to interior rather than exterior. And then the usage, whether it's a area only, full sheet, like photopolymer we're using full sheet, but in other things we may be using area only. If there's a scrap percentage, which you use on area only. And then we're setting all of our default processes. In this case, for dimensional, whatever is first will default. So when I say dimensional, it pulls up the process 1 of engraving. Now I also do cutting, braille, cut vinyl, sandblast, and paint on that dimensional. If we're looking at our photopolymer, you'll see I have the photopolymer, the interior is defaulting, I'm using full sheets, and then the different processes. In my in my example, I was talking about if you did not do hot stamping. In that case, I could come in here and just remove hot stamping from the list, and it will no longer show up in the estimate stage. Okay, now that we have the primary pieces to the composition sign done, let's finish it up by assembling it and adding it any additional hardware. On the right, you'll see Assembly and Notes. Under Assembly, I can add in miscellaneous assembly labor. Maybe it's going to take me 30 minutes to put this together. Now, under assembly labor, once you've added your time, it's just asking for a description of what you're doing with that labor. And then for additional labor is if it's a specific labor that's already in the system outside of assembly. In this case, you get a drop-down list of all the different labors that are currently in the system, and so I can say that I just need an extra hour of assembly labor here as well. But this may be more specific, such as I need drilling labor because I need to drill a bunch that I haven't taken into account. All right. Next thing to the left is hardware. This is for the little spacers and hardware you may need to assemble this particular composition sign. So it's generally your different taps, barrels, and wings. The add-ons is really just for modifiers, anything other questions that can be added to any of the products in the system, and there's nothing in here currently, but you are allowed to. The miscellaneous product. This allows you to add in for any miscellaneous charges. This is often used when people need to go stop at the hardware store, pick up a few things, etc., to assemble it. And then add to finished inventory. This allows you to take a small piece, such as maybe I'm cutting, in this case, my AB piece. I have a 1" by 12" spacing. Now, I may choose to say, instead of area only, go ahead and fill out the full sheet. But as you may understand, that's going to then utilize a bunch of material, and if I'm in a cost-based system, it's going to add those costs to this particular order. But what I could do is say, yes, make these pieces, but I want to take all of them but 10 and put them back into inventory. To do that, you first have to have the piece in inventory that you're going to add to. And that will come into a different video in adding parts, etc. Once that part is there, then I can say what is the type, dimensional inventory, the item itself, and how many are going into inventory. Now I don't have this exact size in here, I'm just using this as an example, but so therefore if I was adding 30 of these back into inventory, it's going to take the cost of that piece by my 30 and remove it from the cost of this particular order. Therefore, because I've added the materials in when I'm cutting it, now I want to remove them and put it back into inventory. These finished goods inventory items can also be used inside of a process. By basically adding the process finished goods inventory, it will give you the options to select the finished goods you've put in the system. And then we have a parts tab, which is an overview, a small shot of all the parts that have been pulled into this order, into this line item, in all the different pieces, individually or combined. Other things you can do with composition sign. Up at the top right, underneath the label itself, you'll see square inch cost, square inch price, whether I'm overriding that or the margin. Currently we're dealing with a cost-based pricing structure. So based off of that cost-based structure, it's giving me a square inch price, and it's telling me that the square inch price is almost 91 cents. I can go in and overwrite that by clicking on square inch price override, and it will give me the availability to overwrite that entire process by the square inch. It is overwriting all three pieces combined, as well as any of the added goods to give you a price. I could also then say, instead of changing the square foot price, I could override the margin. Currently my margin is 62.1% based off of the margins adding for materials, labors, and equipment. But this is a rounded number of all of them. I can say no, I want to change that and do a margin override, and I want to do a 50% margin in case I need to. And then it redoes all the calculations based off of that margin. You'll notice when the margin is selected, the square inch price is removed, and when the square inch price is selected, the margin is moved. It's removed. This concludes our video on composition signs. If you have any further questions, please review our other videos or contact the Serious Implementation Department. Thank you.